and you've talked about the oneness.
Right.
Explain why it's not possible for anybody to go to a place of hell from your perspective and
Mhm.
your experience, which to me trumps something that somebody has read.
I think for so many people, there's a big dichotomy on how you see yourself and how you connect yourself in your ability to understand God. And I think for a lot of people, when there's hatred or judgment or all these things, that's projected onto the image of God, and vice versa. How you see God projects how you see yourself. What I would say is, if God, per se, if that's your image of God, is are all these things, how is it possible for us to be more evolved or more forgiving or more compassionate than an all loving and all knowing God? It's pretty interesting that some people will be able to be more evolved than that image where we could be forgiving, we could be loving, and that being that we call the all knowing, the all omnipotent, is not. It's a devolved version of a lot of people on the planet, so it doesn't make quite a lot of sense. But what I really did experience, much like you said in my NDE, there wasn't fire and brimstone, there wasn't demonic figures. It was just pure euphoric love and nothing else. There was no room for anything else but that. And so I always say, if it ain't love, it ain't God.
My guest today is Jacob Cooper, who had a near death experience when he was only 3 years old. And one of the most incredible parts about his explanation is how clearly he remembers this experience because he didn't have this experience from a 3 year old mind. He had it from his higher self, from his soul's perspective. And he has been able to bring this information back, apply it into his own life, where he has helped hundreds and hundreds of people through his psychotherapy and through his regression therapy sessions. So, really excited for him to share the wisdom that he has brought back from this incredible experience. And Jacob, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Lori, what an honor, to be your guest. I'm a big fan of your channel, as you know, so it's just honored to be here, in this chair today with you.
Well, I want to share with everybody because I love talking about signs and synchronicities on this channel. And I think it's ironic that you were reaching out to me on Facebook Messenger. And at the same time, you were reached out to by my assistant who helps me schedule these within the same 2 or 3 days of each other. I never saw your message because I don't go on Facebook very much, and yet you received a message. So talk about synchronicity and about the universe saying it's time for us to come together and have this amazing collaborative conversation.
Yeah, I was just having this conversation earlier today, how connected we all are, and sometimes we see ourselves in just these separate bodies without this web of interconnectivity that we're a part of. And so once you stop seeing yourself with just within these bodies, but also this, connection that we all have, synchronicities become more understandable, that we're all interconnected, that we're not separate. And I think part of this life is to get over some of the myths and veils of illusions or forgetfulness, that could come with the human condition. But yeah, it's just crazy these days when you come from a place of intention and clarity and purpose, the strings on the other side will pull themselves. And so, yes, the intentions were there, but I think we were also probably just actors from what the other side wanted to orchestrate. And part of that is listening and then having an action plan, 'cause it's not just going to happen automatically. You have to really intend on it, go through it. But it happens all the time, believe it or not. You just have to recognize and notice and be aware. So I thank Spirit for orchestrating this wonderful dialogue.
Me
You know?
too. I think that the synchronicities are the calling card of the universe.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And I think sometimes people will just look at a little dot in a picture and think that's the entire picture. And part of having a spiritual awareness is being able to take a step back and to see the interwovenness, the interconnectivity. the matrix of it all. Um, it's just fascinating. You're seeing all these moving parts work together in alignment and flow, beyond just, the limitations of the surface or the human physical eye.
And Jacob, you have such a unique perspective, having had this experience at the age of 3. So many people that I talk to on this channel who have had near-death experiences had them much later in life, 20s, 40s, 50s, and they are having a difficult time integrating them. But you had it at such a young age. I would imagine that there is no other memory really of what life was like before this experience. And it must just be the norm that you were awake and understand things on a level that most people never could.
Yeah, it's an interesting life to live for certain. Um, in one hand, I don't think I'm that different from other people, and I'll preface that because I think most of us come to this world with some degree of clarity. We're just coming from the other side into these physical bodies, and usually anywhere from the age of 3 to 5, there's a degree of forgetfulness, or for some people, it could be disempowerment. Our societal structures is very prone to spiritual disempowerment, because we're these small physical beings. So we rely on, these bigger adults. And that follows itself not just in a physical way, but also a developmental and awareness way. And so a lot of people just look at us as these blank canvases that don't know a thing, but in reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. And, so I think in a way, there's so much of the world that has created so much influence in the mind, within humanity, instead of having this beautiful mind impact the world. And, so I think that's the position that so many people are in these days is at one point or another, they're starting to remember who they are, that they're not
Yes.
just this body, this name, this job, we're able to transcend that egoic structure to a more connected spiritual, life that's more in congruency with who we really are.
I love that. So beautifully said. Well, you had an incredible experience at the age of 3. So I'll let you tell it in whatever way you want to tell it. And then when we're done, we're going to dive really deep and we're going to talk about abilities that you have after and how your perspective grew over time and how your memory was preserved from this experience.
It's a giddy joy of mine to always share this experience. And I'll preface that having this experience and afterwards, it was not the easiest thing. It was difficult, which we'll get into. But what gives I live by the quote of Pablo Picasso, which is in a sense that the meaning of life is to find your gift and the purpose of it is to give it away. And it took me a long time to recognize that this gift that I was searching for so many years was in my own backyard, was this exact experience. It wasn't thousands of miles away from myself, and that it was right here. And that is something that we all have. We all have a divine spark. We all have a gift. We just need to remember. I'm not that much different than most people, but some people look at me a little bit differently because of this. But September of 1993, like you mentioned, I was just the age of 3 years old, which in my left brain still blows my mind because I still can't believe it was that long ago. And I was able to have full recollection after all these years. We'll get into some of that, but I went to a playground in a park at just the age of 3 years old. At the time, I had something called pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough for infants, children, even adults could really be detrimental to one's health and fatal, in some cases, including mine. I was climbing a ladder, going up top of a slide, and I literally started to suffocate due to the whipping cough, and all parts of my body just began to shut down as if the analogy I always give is you're in a basement and you shut off all the power units in the basement. There's nothing you can do. And my body just lost all functioning, due to the deprivation of oxygen. And then slowly I just felt my brain literally just crack open, crack in half due to the suffocation of oxygen in my brain. And my brain cracked open, and that's when God in the spirit realm came in and I ascended at some insane speed going on a journey within. I did experience this beautiful tunnel-like sensation, but the closest way I could describe it is imagine going on a roller coaster as fast as you possibly can, beyond the speed of thought or light. And that's what I felt when I was vibrating and going higher and higher outside of my body into my brain and having that full crossing over experience to the other side. And once I crossed over to the other side, I really everything opened up. I was able to see this beautiful golden palace behind the right side of my brain, which I now know as the side of creativity and insight that we do get. The left brain is more of the analytical, but I was able to see this beautiful golden palace, and I looked at the colors, and the colors, again, when you're on the other side, there's nothing to compare. It's like the colors that we have are just based off of the spectrum colors of the sun. When you're on the other side, the light is not the sun, but the light of God, and that's what I was seeing within the first scenes of my near-death experience. And there was an angelic choir around this. There was tons of angels all around this structure, and I just felt this incredible euphoria with no beginning, middle, or ending to it. There was no stoppage of how good I was feeling, which is so foreign within the physical body. We're bioneurochemical and knows almost seems like there's always just some type of cap of how high we could go, no matter how high you get on substances or whatever it is, there's always just kind of a cap that you feel. On the other side, you're unlimited. And moments later, I saw this field of this beautiful sky, and then when I was looking into the sky, it felt like kind of like the sunset. And I just had, a concern as to what my body would look like, what my parents would, feel at this time, would everything work out? And I just had this, little bit of concern. And then I just was put in this field of Christ consciousness, which isn't Jesus that came in front of me, but it was more of when you think of the afterlife, you think of frequency, and this frequency was like the highest possible frequency, you know, that I was able to see, including the God frequency. And in this moment, I just felt a sense of reunion. I felt a sense of being understood, but I also felt a sense that all is well, was well, will be well, and there's nothing that you could possibly fear, even if you try. In the end, it's all good, which is so foreign to us because we're so used to, as Lao Tzu would talk about the anxiety of the future, the sadness of the past, but in the moment is, and that's why mindfulness, and that's such a big part of my work, is really that's a taste of the other side. That's incongruence with the other side. And slowly but surely felt my body coming down to the ground, and I saw to the right side and left side of me my two guardian angels or spirit guides. These were my primary guides that I had before I got here in this earth. And they were male and female guide, and they were just absolutely stunning. Like I can't like describe how beautiful physically they are. I mean, just remarkable. And at the time, it's the one detail that slips my mind about my NDE and was their specific names, but it's more of like a human thing today, just call them the guides. But I felt like, holy blank, like they've been here the whole time. And I had these blinders on, and I was only 3 years old, but I'm like, my God, there is so much around us all the time that sometimes we forget about. And when I was seeing my spirit guides, I always give this example. In this life, we're taught that greatness is outside of us, or maybe, that's Lori's greatness or Jacob's greatness or whoever, and I'm just small me. And when I was looking at the guides, it's just like the most beautiful beings you could possibly imagine. And imagine like you have like this incredible infatuation with some, you know, Hollywood celebrity. For me, it's always been Demi Moore, whatever, So imagine like Demi Moore has for me like that same degree of investment or interest and respect that I had for her, but it wasn't like infatuation, but more of a degree of respect and reciprocal energy. And that's the feeling that I got from the guides. Much as we look at up at them, they look up at us, and they're with us at each step of the journey, and they see us through such a different lens than we see ourselves. Slowly but surely, I saw myself on the ground, and I felt a form to it. And all the people that I went to the playground on that day as a young child were surrounding my body. I felt them, trying to wake me up, touching me, and I wanted to grab them and shake them, be like, if you only knew how good I feel right now. And so I could for me, I could understand how spirits feel on the other side when, yes, we're having all the human stuff, but from the soul level, they want us to know that they have never been better in their lives before, crossing over. But I felt a form, and I was able to really look at all the people that were with me in the playground on that day, and I saw who they really were. I was able to see their guardian angels around them, their auric fields around them, and the people that were with weren't like, Wayne Dyer types or the Dalai Lama around us. They were just regular CPA types or whatever. But what it taught me that there's no such thing as ordinary. Each person deep within is extraordinary. And we all have this, extraordinary parts of ourselves that sometimes lay dormant throughout a lifetime. And slowly but surely, I saw an infinite amount of angels that were literally floating right in front of my very eyes. And whereas the spirit guides are very focused on myself, these angels are very youthful in presentation, but they were just looking in the distance, sending love, sending healing without expecting anything in return. They didn't have separate identities as the guides did. They were more just uniformal in sending love, and they were literally floating right in front of me on this physical veil, just a thin dial above this reality. Then slowly but surely I had my soul team come in, step in, and I was posed with the most difficult question, which is would I stay on the other side and continue, or would I continue my work, which is a rare percentage of people that do get that. I would say around 75% of people are told, hey, you have more work to do. There's, stuff to do for me, whatever reason. To this day, I don't know. I was given that autonomous question, and that was the hardest thing. And I just said, if I do stay, what will this life be like? Who am I? Why am I here? The biggest questions that we get in seminars. And slowly but surely, I had a big life review, and you could say, Jacob, that must have been a 2-second film. And I'll push back on that, and I'll say, time is so much different over there, but it's also so much different over here. It really is not a matter of the years of our life, but rather the life filled within those years. And we have all met people who lived 95 years who haven't lived one day, and people lived one day who lived 100 years, So timing is truly what we make of it. It's a matrix over there, and it's a matrix over here. It's so different than what we see in linear time. But saw myself spanning the globe, kind of behind you, going from culture to culture, civilizations to civilization, and I was able to really have a strong connection with my last life, which has been evidentially read by a couple different intuitives prior to me ever saying a word publicly, where they were able to describe the exact scenes, what transpired, everything. They didn't know me. I was a complete stranger, and I just came to their office, and this happened on more than one occasion. So it was validating for me that I was like, whoa, this is not crazy, but I did see my life that, again, I don't criminalize mental health. I don't criminalize suicide. There's such a stigma associated to it. I don't say complete. I just said crossed over, due to, that decision. But I did see that, and I saw the correlationship of my near-death experience, in that experience. In a sense, from completion we begin, and my near-death experience was a big lesson for myself and other people, which was in my last lifetime, my back was against the wall. I was drowning. There wasn't a log or anything to grab onto. I felt this way. And instead of trying to struggle against the external circumstances, I didn't go inward. I didn't surrender to this light within. And when I had my near-death experience, everything was taken from me, but the one freedom within that I decided to surrender to was what I call the breath of eternity, which is what I believe we're all created from. That's a centerpiece of creation. And you want to call it a divine spark, you want to call it the soul. But I just surrendered to this greater power that was far more than death itself. And, it was allegorical for life after death, and also people who are going through struggles, and the power that surrender has, which is really not giving up, but giving into the power that's always, and the force that's always been inside of you and around you. And with that, just asked what my life would be like, and I was given premonitions of myself speaking in front of a lot of different crowds and people. And, I wasn't some pompous guru like, making billions of dollars or just whatever. It was a very uniformal energy where it just wasn't about myself. It was just the message was far greater than small me. And I said, wow, this agreement to be a messenger of this and to send this out is not something that I could say no to. Heaven will always be there, but the window to bring this in, to say no to that, I can't. And so with that agreement, everything started to dissipate, the guides, my soul team, the angels, and I was just like filled myself with regret where I was just like, how will I know this will happen? Like, what did I just do? I just turned down heaven to come back to this, place. And they said, just really watch your thoughts and trust in the higher intelligence that created you, that planned your life. Your life is charted, and trust that far more than your fears and doubts. And with that, I woke up in a hospital bed. My mother was surrounding me, and the rest is kind of history, to really make sense of. So that's a little bit of the short, NDE narrative, but I'm sure there's some questions and things of that sort. But yeah.
That is such an incredible experience on so many levels. I'm lucky when I get to talk to somebody who has one view of heaven, but you had so many parts of this. You had a tunnel experience, you had
Hmm.
the heaven, you saw the angels, you saw your spirit guides, you had a life review. You also were given, I would say, cosmic confirmations before
Hmm.
you came back down and given a choice to come back and understood that you had this bigger purpose. So you come back and now this is your new norm. Do you feel like your life was changed at 3 years old after coming back? And if so, how?
Oh, it was drastically changed. I mean, within my family dynamic, I grew up, in a great home, but it was very traditional, religious. We all had the same food, the same schools, the same everything. And I'm by far the biggest outlier. And there's certainly always black sheeps in the family. Those are the ones who are meant to change the world. But this was far, far different than my own social upbringing. So for that, it's kind of like, right, what, that things just don't happen randomly. Something happened. But absolutely, but it did take time for me to really fully integrate it. Um, I would say the biggest thing that changed was certainly intuition, which is a big after effect gift that people, bring to the surface after NDEs a lot. And I do think a lot of that had to do with the brain. Within my NDE, my brain just, like I said, totally snapped in half. And as a young child, I don't remember much from my childhood other than these otherworldly encounters. But I just remember coming back from my NDE, sitting in a class and have this light filling my brain. And I was able to really cross over to the other side at will and to really still be with my guides, not probably as strong as my NDE, but still feeling their presence and connecting to them and being able to have that ability to just rise above the body and, cross over at will. There was times where there was a moment and I wrote this in my first book where I turned to a classmate in preschool and I was seeing all these spirits filling the room. And I just turned to the classmate and I just said, do you see what I'm saying? And there's what I'm seeing. And this classmate had this bewildered look, and that was just so soul crushing. I was like, oh no, like I, feel very disenfranchised and alone, and not everyone gets this. And so, for a kid, what's every kid taught is just to fit in, to be normal. That's what's prescribed. And so for a while, that's what I had to do to survive. But to thrive, I needed to make sense out of all this. And so the NDE was always there. It was more of a nuisance than anything. I would see things, hear things, know things, and they would happen. And I just wanted to be a kid. And I didn't have like a term for it. It wasn't like psychic or intuition. It was like, leave me alone. I want to live my life, just play sports, run around. But all these things would come to me. But then, once I was able to embrace it, I saw it as a gift and not, a curse in a way. But it took me some time to really embrace all that I experienced. But my father once told me that when I had my NDE, like a little bit after, I told him, Dad, when I was rushed by the ambulance to the hospital, something happened that day. You're not going to understand it now, but one day you will. And so I was very private. I didn't tell anyone with what happened to me for almost 20, I would say around 15 to 20 years was when I first told someone or recognized that I even that this was a thing, that there was a term for it. I had no idea. I just thought I was the only one who had this. So it took me quite some time to really figure this out on a human level, not on a soul level.
Wow. I'm shocked that you waited that long when you were little, because I think about like the relationship you have with your mom and how you
Hmm.
just tell things because you don't have the filter and you don't know what not to tell. I want to come back to this part, but I want to go back to the near-death experience because you brought
Sure.
up that classroom example where you could see the spirits around people and you had the experience on the other side where you not only saw your angels that were just beyond beautiful, beyond an explanation, but you also saw the spirits around others
Hmm.
on the other side.
Yeah.
So I want to explain a little bit because there's a term that people use spiritually, and that is that you are never alone. And I
Mm.
feel like as we're going through our human life, we have these experiences and we're in positions sometimes where we don't have anyone around us. People have died, people have moved away, kids
Mhm.
have moved out, and people find themselves completely alone. And they feel that they truly are on their own without help. You
Mhm.
know, not by somebody telling you, but by actual experience, that that's not true. So, for the people that are watching who feel completely alone, will you
Mhm.
please explain to them from your perspective what is really happening to them?
Yeah. That's a really great question. I think in a way, when we're feeling a degree of darkness or heaviness within our lives, it could be an opportunity for transformation. If you look at a lot of pivotal spiritual teachers, they came from a place of emptiness to wholeness. And when you're feeling a degree of loneliness, you actually have a positionality to receive and to question things. But I think it's really about being open. And sometimes so many people have such an identity synonymous, with being, lonely. And it's hard for them to let that go. But I would just say the biggest thing to do is just to be curious, to be open, and to find ways to really evaluate ourselves because sometimes there's a big dichotomy with who we really are on a spiritual basis versus how we see ourselves on a human level. And it may be true that yes, on a human level that is, but this isn't the only story that there is. And it's important to understand that we are so much more than we could possibly conceive. But I would say, isolation, loneliness is a big epidemic. It's really intensified probably in the last 5 years. There's many factors at play, but it's so important to have that connectivity. I work in the mental health field, and I've seen countless studies that have, had people who have had experiences of good environments, but social isolation versus people with absolutely terrible physical environments, but human connections. And people who tend to do better are those who have degrees of connection. And so, regardless of environment, even if the physical people aren't there, even if we're deprived of that, there's always help, there's always connection to have. And it's just kind of like Wi-Fi. You just have to be curious and tune in, and eventually you'll start to see the bars add up. But it has to deal with exploration, and that's how we're able to explore things beyond this box. And that's how the whole world was really be able to see for what it is. People were able to just question the world as flat versus the world as round, and they were able to go daring and push, that construct that they had, and they found other worlds. And I think for people who are feeling alone, it's important to understand you're not alone. There are many people who are feeling that way. But yeah, what I would say is to be curious with that concept and to explore Because if people remembered all that's around you at all times, it would be very hard to feel, alone. And I always say too, if you like the person that you're living with, it's hard, and I'm not talking about the person outside of you, the person right here, repairing that relationship, it's also more challenging to be alone. So finding ways to improve your self-love is very important. You know, unconditional love and also really tuning in to all the love and superpowers and beings that are with us, cheering us on, to really remember who we are and the love that's always around us that cannot leave, even in physical death. And I'm certainly a living embodiment of that, and many others are too.
Beautiful. I think that that's so helpful for people who are listening. And I actually really appreciate the last part that you added, where you mentioned that if you like who you're living with when you're alone, then it's a lot easier to do. And if you don't, then this is your time to actually begin to repair that
Mhm.
relationship. You didn't say work on yourself. You said repair that relationship, which means that you have a I'm not going to say responsibility, but you have a part
Mhm.
in whether you are connected or disconnected, liking, not liking that person in the mirror, which is a beautiful way to say it. I've never heard anybody
All right.
speak about that in that way.
Yeah. Well, we're not like car mechanics or damaged goods like we see ourselves. There's a big pathology. Deep down, we all are these beautiful beings. We just have to it's kind of like what was his name? Michelangelo would say, people would ask him like, "What do you do?" He goes, "I don't do anything. I just chip away at the masterpiece that's always been there." And I think that's what this is all about. We all have this masterpiece, this divine spark, and you just have to connect to that and remove all these things that have been adding up. But it's very congruent with the human condition. I think we come here as beautiful light beings in this human world to really spread the light and to remember that we are the light. And when we're able to do that towards ourselves, we could do it to the world. And when we do it to another, we're really just doing it to ourselves. So, um,
Absolutely.
it's important.
Amen for that. Amen for that. That's, I think, one of the most important messages. When I first started interviewing people, I used to just look for people who had had life reviews
Hmm.
because it was proof to me that the ripple effect mattered and that what you do to somebody else, you literally do to yourself. And you had this life review and you mentioned something that it wasn't about the years lived, it was what you packed into those years. So you had only been 3, so you're right, that part of that life would have flashed
Hmm.
very quickly, but you had asked a very specific question, which was, "Why should I go back? What is in it for me if
Hmm.
I go back?" Can you share a little bit more detail of what you saw in that life review or what you felt in that life review?
Yeah, I mean, when I was posing that question, why am I here? It was really, more of a reference from the ego. And when I was able to see the premonitions, it was able to transcend that life isn't just about me, it's about the ripple effect. Because that's the only thing that's ever left when we leave this world. And, that degree of service is to me the closest dynamic to a God embodiment. When I think of God, I think of the creator of life, the creative eternal life force, and the giver of life to all. And we could do that with each other on a metaphorical basis. And so, that's really been a big calling card when people are feeling out of sorts or losing their physical breath or emotion, whatever that is. I think inspiration is really the oxygen of our times, and awareness and wisdom, and that's something that I really try to do because I do believe that the quality of our life is the quality of our information, which influences the quality of our focus. And so if you're able to be someone who spreads the good news and be a harbinger of that and reminds people of who they are without being very, you know, uh, traumatizing to some people that we've had through religious kind of things where it's just been very force fed, but more of an empowerment and just kind of planting a seed and allowing people to see that, then that's great. So really the life review was really about understanding the eyes of another and how we're all here to give. And I take a step back and I ask myself, why did I have my near death experience in a playground? Like it could have been I don't know, Yankee Stadium, it could have been, I don't know, like, you name it, like an ice cream truck probably, probably should have had that the way that I used to, like, run after these people and eat, but, like, why they're out of any place? And I think really it speaks to the symbology, of what I saw my premonition and the condition that we're all a part of, where we're all just the children of God playing in the eternal kingdom of God, the eternal playground of God, here as our brothers and sisters keeper, here to really take care of one another, to remember that you are me, I am you, and we are all together is that song. I think that's the Beatles or John Lennon once said that. So we're all in this together, and just to let go of separation and to find more of the we consciousness, the unity consciousness versus the us versus them or the me versus the we. And yeah, that really is a close embodiment to heaven on earth when you're able to live congruently with that and to see the greater phyla that we're all a part of.
Yes, exactly. You mentioned religion, so I want to go back to this because I have heard people in near death
Mhm.
experiences speak about Christ consciousness. But what I haven't heard is somebody with a 3-year-old perspective who didn't go to church in a way that they would probably have absorbed lessons and concepts by the age of 3
Mhm.
about what Christ consciousness would even be. So
Mhm.
obviously, you have to have had an eternal recognition of that, knowledge of that, because you've been on the other side before. But what can you tell us about the Christ consciousness and about maybe what we have misinterpreted through religion that we all need to know and understand?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think within almost any religion, there's a kernel of truth and there's spirituality, but sometimes it's man's and God's image instead of God's, and within man or woman's image. And for me, it's very different over there than it is over here. We walk around with like our names, our egos, our bodies, and that's just an experience of the soul, but it's not the totality. Beyond every being is a consciousness, and that consciousness has a divine spark. And I was just connecting to Christ consciousness. It was just this incredibly high vibrational frequency on the other side that was quite familiar, and just my soul just felt just incredibly euphoric by connecting to it as well as familiar. But when I was connecting to that, it was just more this frequency. And I think each lifetime we come here, we're trying to really improve the frequency of ourselves and the planet around us so that there's very little veil of separation. But, to me, that Christ consciousness was like the highest bar, possible, of the infinite creative source that I was able to see. So, to me, it's just, my biggest takeaways from what Christ said in the physical was the kingdom of heaven and me is in you too. And sometimes, if you're playing basketball, if you're a musician, sometimes we need these inspirational figures to find that part of ourselves within us. And a lot of times these high tides rise all boats, but what they're trying to do is not to get attached to who they are, but really connected to who you are and what's inside of you. And just for that to be a reflection. So, it's just a reflection of the highest possible part of all that we have and all that we are, which is, a spark of the divine. And that's really what I was able to see, but it's very comforting, uplifting, and quite familiar. But with people ask me, they're like, "Oh my God, you're Jewish, or are you Jewish for Jesus, or whatever?" I was like, Jesus is probably more Jewish than I was.
I was gonna say, isn't he the ultimate
Uh,
Jew?
born in the Middle East, yeah, very much kind of like a non-traditional reform, rabbi. So I think there's a dichotomy between the religious depiction and more of what you see on the other side, and there's more of a subjective. I think what's a little bit of dichotomy of spirituality and religion is more of a personalization, to all these things, and that these things aren't held within the select few. It's almost kind of like a capitalistic monopolization of a select few of truths, and we're all just kind of like paupers, and we're just here to like, and that's a part of the, control mechanism. I mean, for instance, um, I was on like coast to coast radio, and someone asked me, um, why was reincarnation, for instance, banned within Constantinople's, teachings of Jesus? And what I would say is that occurred around like 350 AD, something like that. A lot of it had to do with that when you think of reincarnation, you think of other opportunities, and that's a nightmare for a lot of religions because of what they wanted to teach is that you don't get other chances. There's heaven, hell, purgatory, whatever, and you're not forgiven. You don't continue, and so that goes against a lot of their desire to kind of like control with fear basis. So it's fascinating how human beings kind of interfere with the purity of the teachings and the experiences. So, but yeah, I mean, I think there's like references with like Elijah the prophet and trying to remember the figure in the Bible, but again, I'm no theologian, but yeah, there were certainly references within Jesus' teachings as well with that did speak to past lives.
Well, Jacob, I'm so glad that you went here. I don't often go here in an interview.
Hmm.
I did do a video on my channel when I first launched my channel. I did 63 videos called Uncover Your Soul's Purpose. What you don't know is holding you back.
Hmm.
And in that, I talked about heaven and hell. And I talked about my belief that there is no hell. And having been on the
Right.
other side, the only thing I felt was love. There couldn't be anything. But the other part that I think that most people do not understand because they haven't had the experience of it is what we truly mean when we say that we are one. And I see this in the comments all the time. And I always answer to it. And that the comment that I'll get, it'll be on a video that has something that goes against a religious tenet. Like one lady had an experience where she said, sin wasn't what I thought it was. And so I'll get a lot of comments that will say
Hmm.
things like, don't listen to this woman. You're not following the scripture.
Right.
She's disguised as the devil, as Satan, and she's going to be cast to hell.
Right.
If you don't go through Jesus, you're not going to heaven. And I say the same thing pretty much to every person, which is love and not fear. And from my personal experience on the other side, we're all connected, we're all one.
Hmm.
You couldn't cast anything away because you're all one. There is no ability to do that on a level. And so since you brought up the hell part, I really want you to elaborate a little bit on this. And you've talked about the oneness.
Right.
Explain why it's not possible for anybody to go to a place of hell from your perspective and
Hmm.
your experience, which to me trumps something that somebody has read. An experience trumps a reading. You tasted
Right.
an orange is different than I told you what the orange is like.
Yeah. Well, I think for so many people, there's a big dichotomy on how you see yourself and how you connect yourself in your ability to understand God. And I think for a lot of people, when there's hatred or judgment or all these things, that's projected onto the image of God and vice versa. How you see God projects how you see yourself. What I would say is if God per se, if that's your image of God, are all these things, how is it possible for us to be more evolved or more forgiving or more compassionate than an all-loving and all-knowing God? It's pretty interesting that some people will be able to be more evolved than that, image where we could be forgiving, we could be loving, and that being that we call the all-knowing, the all omnipotent is not. It's a devolved version of a lot of people on the planet, so it doesn't make quite a lot of sense. But what I really did experience, much like you said in my NDE, there wasn't fire and brimstone, there wasn't demonic figures. It was just pure euphoric love and nothing else. There was no room for anything else but that. And so I always say, if it ain't love, it ain't God.
I
So
love that. I want to start saying that. That's such an
yeah.
easy response for me on my channel.
Truth is simple. We get in our left brains and we could analyze and make complexities and a lot of stuff. I think the other side is very, unfortunately for a lot of people's lives, very different. we haven't been unconditionally loved. And so how could we believe what we haven't seen and experienced? And so a lot of people think that the other side is just a carryover of some of the mistreatment that we had over here. Are there carryovers on the other side? Absolutely. But the only thing that carries over is love. The rest dissipates and is healed. Love is all that lasts. And that's a very versatile concept. That could be loving that you have with a partner, loving of a hobby, loving, but the love that you are and all that you experience goes on. The rest falls by the wayside. Is
I completely, 1,000,000% agree with you. But in the comments, what people will say to that is, but what about Hitler? What about the people doing these abuses?
Oh,
And
sure.
my response is always, nobody gets away with anything. We have a life review where we have to experience not only what our perspective was, but what another's perspective was. And in that sense, you don't get away with anything because you experience it as if you did it to yourself.
Mhm.
Everything and the ripple effect of everything. Can you speak to that a little bit? I don't know if you have a reference or a vantage point to even comment on that, but if you can, I'd love to hear what your comments would be.
That's absolutely true as well. Like two things could be true at the same time. Like you put out love, you get it. But when it comes to harm, when it comes to damage, that's been really showcased and proven through the life review that what you do to another, you do to yourself. It's not that God judged you. I think we experience and judge ourselves, and we experience the life of separation that we had. And that's why near-death experiencers and channels like these are so significant because what they do is allow you to live a life as if you're looking back on it on the other side and what you would want to do here and how to make that transition, that life review a little easier. It's not like we're going to be perfect beings. We're all going to, uh, mess up, but it's very hard to walk without falling. And once you recognize that a mistake stays a mistake when you don't learn from it, but mistake becomes growth when you do learn from it. You're able to embrace the journey and all of the imperfections and see that as a part of your trajectory of growth. So, yeah, I mean, that weak consciousness, through the eyes of another is so significant in people's journey because, again, it saves you just a lot of, you know, I don't know, say issues, but it's a lot more of a seamless transition on the other side, and you feel like you're able to actually remember and live your truth a lot easier.
Jacob, so much wisdom coming out of your mouth. I am beyond grateful that you're here today and we're having this conversation. You also had a really interesting perspective in your near-death experience, and that was at the end when you had made your decision to come back. And these entities, I don't know if they were your spirit guides or if they were a council of beings. I
Mhm.
don't even know if you know, but you were told three different things. And I want to address each one of them and have you elaborate on them because I think that they're very important. Number one, they said to you, your life is chartered. So will you explain what you mean by your life is chartered or charted? Charted,
Charted,
charted.
charted.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to edit that
Uh,
out. That was terrible. So will you explain what you
we're,
mean?
we're not we're not
You
going to
say
charter school.
your
Yeah.
life is charted. So what did they
Charted.
mean by that? Yeah.
So there is, a divine soul plan for all of us. We're not just dropped into these bodies randomly without a plan, without an intelligence. And that's really a big takeaway that I really hold on to from my near-death experience is sometimes we just see this life and all that there is. We don't think that there's anything behind it. It's kind of just random chaos. And so it's something that I saw firsthand that we do have a life review where you meet with your guardian angels, your soul teams, and some of the council of elders on the other side. After my near-death experience, I kept on having this reoccurring dream and experience in the waking state of not only remembering past lives, but also the life review that I had, and just remembering the life that was designed before I got here. And I didn't have that term of life review that was later understood. I'm like, oh, that's what you're talking about. But this life is not random, and we have different themes, different missions, different challenges, and that's very significant. And it's very significant I would say because, one of the brightest men of the modern day time, I think is a spiritual teacher, but he was known as a scientist. Albert Einstein has that famous quote, which is, you know, the most significant question to really influence the trajectory of your life is the universe random, with you, or against you? You could call that God, the divine, whatever that is. And when you're able to really understand the divine pattern and purpose, you're able to really live with a lot more acceptance, flexibility, trust, and adaptability to change. So that's a very important positionality to have. But for so many people, they'd be like, geez, I made a horror movie. Like, what was I thinking? And when, I was like, it's not always pleasant, but when you remind yourself, hey, you know what? Sometimes, as Maya Angelou would say, from going through the darkest and most difficult period is when you find your light the strongest. And people who've transformed the planet have been through utter, you know what, and back, but have come out stronger, So, yeah, it's just consider yourself someone who has a big call and a big mission in that dichotomy of pain and purpose, that they go hand in hand.
Yeah, everything is happening for me and not to me.
Yeah, I love that quote. Yeah, I
I do
love that.
too.
I love
I do
that
too.
principle.
I
Yeah.
when things are going wrong and I'm like, I don't have time for this. Like, shoot, it's happening for me, not to me. Like, what's the bigger message?
Yeah.
And I feel like it changes your perspective so much when you can stop that thought, which
Mhm.
actually is a perfect segue into my next thing that you heard, which was that you needed to watch your thoughts.
Mhm.
So tell us why they told you we need to watch our thoughts. And I'm going to also caveat and say, if you really don't understand this and you need to dive in deeper, the telepathy tapes are a great methodology to
Mhm.
explain why we need to watch our thoughts.
Yeah, I think we will all have thoughts, in working in meditation and mindfulness, it's kind of just like you want to just observe, not absorb. But again, sometimes thoughts could become beliefs, could lead to behaviors. And I think it's important. I'll preface really, it's to really understand the quality of your focus on your thoughts, because we all have thoughts. It's like a radio station. We all have a million thoughts occurring at the same time. But to get really into alignment, with the thoughts that will, hmm, I would say, allow you to be more adaptive, that are more sourceful in alignment with truth versus those that are disaligned in a way, and to really learning to work with a lot of those thoughts that we may see are more negative or fear-based, and really allowing ourselves to develop self-compassion to those thoughts. And a lot of that is kind of inner child work at play. But I think we want our focus to be in alignment with the higher intelligence that's around us. And part of that is within the period of surrender and trust, because I think we were created with a brilliant thought. We were created with a brilliant idea, and every creation, everything was once a brilliant thought, and so were we. And we have to remember that and to just really trust the power of our focus and the power of our thoughts to be aligned with the brilliance that we all have. Yeah.
Love that. That's amazing. So the last thing kind of ties in again. Thank you very much for the segue into the thing that they told you, which is that you have a wisdom. What do they
Mhm.
mean by that?
Well, we all have wisdom. I think we all have a divine spark. We all have an intelligence, and sometimes we'll walk through life forgetting that. I know, certainly I did. I come from a very, pretty much academic, intellectual, achieving kind of a family, kind of left brain. And so within my structure, academics were such a big significance, and grades and all these things. And so we're told, like, hey, you get a good grade, you're a wise person, you're a smart person. And if you don't, like, you're not as good. And I think some people get so caught up with the doing or the projections of other perceptions on ourselves versus our own inner being, which is deeply wise regardless of our doing. And so there could be people with great doings that could have all these high level positions or jobs, but if their being isn't there, it doesn't matter. And there's people with a lot of doingness that's not on this structure that high, but if their being is there, then they've understood the assignment. So I think really it's understanding our own being. And when we're able to implement the being and the doing, then, we're really transforming this world to a much better place. So I think within all of us is that seed of wisdom, is that seed of awareness, is that seed of knowing. And part of that is, soul empowerment. And to really overcoming a lot of the wounds that we've had. I think trauma isn't necessarily the things that happen to you, but rather the response that you have to trauma. And I think being born in a way is traumatic, and we're all kind of responding to this adjustment and all of, just the difference, that we come from this warm and loving place, and all of a sudden this world could be quite cold. But as Albert Camus said, remembering within the dead of the winter, there is that brilliant infinite summer, and we all have, that connection. We all have that spark. We just have to remember that and connect to that within the journeys of our lives.
Wow. Wow. So much insight that you brought back, so much intelligence. I'm so surprised that it took you so long to share this verbally with other people in your life. But as you are
Mhm,
evolving from the age of 3 after this experience, you also opened up and you mentioned one of the things that I think is the most common
mhm.
ability that people have after these near-death experiences, which is an increase of intuition.
Yeah.
Obviously, not only just intuition around you, but you were seeing entities and spirits around others.
Mhm.
So will you share a few things that stand out to you that were maybe aha moments of either your intuition or what you saw around others as you were interacting with them?
All the time. I'll take the place where I'm living right now as an example. Just a couple years ago, I was getting a Reiki treatment, and I was driving around, late at night. I was looking up at the stars and everything and driving around, and a voice told me, "You're going to be living here." And I just heard it. I'm like, "You got to be kidding me. There's like mansions around here, big houses. Like, who am I?" Like, I mean, what are you talking? I'm like gonna live in a porta potty and like a construction site. Like, what do you mean? But like, like that voice told me that, and I'm like, all right. And then sure enough, like I just get this, realtor friend of mine that showed me this place. And it was literally right around the corner from exactly where I had, that message. I wasn't like actively seeking places in this area. I wouldn't go anywhere near it, but that was just a voice. And I think intuition allows you to remember the impossible vision, this vision that you don't see to be possible to come true. It reminds you of like the limitless potential that you have. It's things that have, been, also difficult or adversive. There was like this kid who was kind of like being a jerk to me, whatever. And I had this image that this kid was going to go very young, and sure enough, I'm driving to work in a random area, 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning. And right when I'm about to drive, this random road is closed in the middle of like nowhere. And I turn on the news, and it turns out that exact place where I drove by early in the morning, just a couple hours earlier, this, man transitioned in a horrific car accident early in the morning. And so for me it's like having that connection, having that intuition from high school, and then years later as an adult, and then being there at that scene pretty much was just wild. So, and stuff like that,
That's
I'll just get,
incredible.
yeah.
So when you had that thought that that kid was going to transition and he was being a little bit of a jerk, did that claircognizance, I'm going to call it, help you to then approach how you would treat him or
Yeah, it just
take
said like
that
it's not
information
like
in?
yeah, don't go like just go easy, like it's like stuff like that, kind of thing. So yeah, like it wasn't like a voice of vindictiveness, like I want this person it wasn't that, it was something else. And then obviously the validation where I was right there in this random area that morning, couple hours after. What's the mathematical probability? It's
I
just
know. That's
uh
what I love. I love a synchronicity where it's multiple things put together to
yeah.
where you cannot say with your any brain, right or left brain, that it's just a coincidence.
Right. From that point, 10 years earlier, randomly to connect to that day. I mean, what are the chances? And so
Zero.
stuff like that, and just a lot of times it has to do with people transitions for whatever reason. I guess having an NDE, you're just kind of sensitive to it. I mean, I had premonitions of having this experience, and I was able to like remember like a dream that I had, a couple of days even before my NDE. Like I said, I remember very little about my NDE, but there was premonitions, and when I was having my NDE, it just felt like a deja vu experience. Like, oh my God, like I've seen this, like this is coming. There's nothing I can do to resist it. I wasn't ready to transition. I wanted to still stay here, but I'm like, all right, this is happening, and I just kind of had to Bruce Lee the whole thing, like be like water, and that's it. But, yeah, and, it's funny, I think really we're all intuitive beings, but I think a lot of it has to do with the brain. And this is very congruent with NDE research where they'll really will show that, the brain is not the producer of consciousness, but is really the filter. From firsthand experience, having, like, no brain functionality and having this heightened experience, I could tell you firsthand, absolutely 100%. With that, it's like I'll give an example. And after my NDE, my brain was much different, obviously, and the filter was more open, for the two worlds, to coexist. Um, but it's like when you think of a filter, if it's a clean filter, like in a fish tank, clean water, whatever, if it's all, bogged up with this human stuff, you're not going to be allowing, the spirits and that connection to come in. But I'll give an example. Like most people will dream at night, a lot of people will have spirit visitations. Do you think it's because your salt lamp are on and it's like mine in the background and it's ambient that all of a sudden your loved ones decide to come in at that time, to visit you? Or, is it something else? And in reality, sleep, you're just going to those deeper not alpha, I'm sorry, delta waves, that really allow your brain to be open so that spirits can come in. We're not in, beta mode within our brainwaves as much, where we're a little bit more blocked and there's a lot more chatter. So it really has to do with the brain slowing down its vibrational frequency so yours could increase. So, delta has a slower brainwave frequency than, let's say, beta, but your spirit frequency, amplifies with that, if that makes sense.
It does. And I'm so glad you brought this up about dreams versus visitations,
Mhm,
because this is a question that I am personally asked.
mhm.
People, when they know that you're in these spiritual realms and you have these experiences, they'll ask this question, and that is, how do I know if it was just a dream or if it was a real visitation from a loved one? And I know what I want to say, but I would like to hear what you would say to somebody who asked you that question.
That's a great question. I mean, having a near-death experience, this life feels more like a dream and that feels more like reality. So the concept of dream is hard for me to like speak about because, that to me is reality. But that's a really good question, just since how do you know, if it's kind of like if it's an actual visitation or not? Really, really good. I mean, I'm curious to what you have to say, but but I would just say like if it feels very authentic, like it's like in real time and it's happening, it's you conversing, with them as no time has stopped, and it's like a clear connection like that, would lead itself to more of a spirit visitation, to me. If it's something like symbolic and it's kind of scary with the loved one, that you've had in the past, that's more of kind of dream. But if it's more of like a clear connection like we're having right now and it's
Mhm.
a clear conversation, you feel like, I mean, if I've had these dreams where I'm just kind of like I'm dreaming and I'm just chilling on my couch with my grandfather, like it's right now, like this is happening, and like, and I wake up, I'm like, holy, that was not reality, that was a dream, like that, like felt more real than this. So I would say the reality basis of it and just how almost organic and human it feels versus some kind of trippy situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Because I think that one of the biggest barometers to understand whether it was a dream or visitation is how clearly you remember it
Yeah.
months or years later. When somebody has a visitation,
Hmm.
it's not something that they wake up and they forget and it fades over the day. When you have a dream, You wake up and it does fade over the day. Maybe if you write it down, you'll remember a little bit more clearly. But a visitation, you can talk to somebody about it a week later, a
Mhm,
month later, and it will feel as clear to you as it did that morning you had it. And the other part about it is I think that when they show up in a dream, it's just like on the other side. You know how they say, I went to the other side, and I'll use my friend Jeff,
mhm,
who is our mutual friend, Jeff Olson, who had a near-death experience. He's in the car. His wife has been killed in this
mhm,
accident next to him, and he sees what she looks like. And then he's on the other side, and she's there, and she looks the most beautiful he has ever seen her.
mhm.
She's whole, she's complete, not a hair out of place. She's absolutely stunningly gorgeous. And I've heard people say, my grandmother came to me and it was the most beautiful I had ever seen her. She had this glow to her, this light about her. She still looked human, but she looked more beautiful. And I think that that's another marker of it being a visitation versus a dream. But I
Oh,
like yours too, that realness. The realness is a big part of it also.
yeah, the authenticity, the realness. A lot of dreams are very symbolic, basis, but we're having that clear communication. Yeah, it's just really nice that Jeff, was able to describe that image of Tanya in that difficult
Yes.
moment. And it's been a story that's been so transformative to so many people
Oh my goodness.
about healing, forgiveness, growth, and, all that. So, quite a profound story that he has had for sure. Mhm,
Absolutely. So you have had this experience, you have these abilities that you've shared with us, and then you pick a path. Unlike just like everybody else, you had to have a job, you had to
mhm.
earn some money, and you picked something very specifically to get into. And one of the things that I love that you do are these regressions. So will you tell people a little bit about what you do with these
Mhm.
regressions and how you came to uncover that that's what your path was?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit painful for me as a child to have these recurring dreams and conscious experience of this, past life that I had, and I wasn't able to really verbalize it or talk to anyone. It was just kind of a nuisance. But again, that's a big part of life: pain, misunderstanding, having clarity, giving it to purpose, and being for another. But for me, also, what I was getting is a lot of people would say, "Hey, I haven't had a near-death experience. How do I know we're eternal? I want a near-death experience," stuff like that. And I think with regression therapy, at the very least, what you're able to really find is that the soul continues. That there's a bodily death, but there's never a death of the soul. And that's affirmative to people to really understand the eternity, where they're, like you said, they're able to have that firsthand direct experience. It's like we could talk about a swimming pool or we could go in one, and they're able to have that direct immersive experience. So that's great, but also it's for a lot of my clients, it could be very logical, very healing. And I use the word logical because there's a lot of illogical conditions that people have, and they don't understand the origins of those pathologies, and they're able to go to the direct source of it. It becomes very logical, it becomes very understandable. So I believe everything has a point of origin, an explanation, and if you can understand the why, you can know the what and the how. Why is this happening, and how am I going to get through this? What does it need to do? What do I need to do? Which is very Viktor Frankl based, if you're familiar with him. Holocaust survivor, clinical
Yeah.
psychiatrist, author of the book Man's Search for Meaning. But it could be very healing. It could explain a lot of dynamics, and it can also allow people to understand who they are, why they're here, their unique mission, and things for them to really overcome so that messages don't need to repeat themselves from these greater lessons being embraced. So,
I
uh,
think you're so lucky because you said doing this doesn't feel like a job. And I said to you, when you love what you do, you never work a day of your life. And I feel like you've definitely found the path that allows you to help wake up the collective on a level that most people don't.
Yeah, and it does feel great. It feels rewarding. I love what I do. Uh, and also it's a balance. I think this is who I am, that I can't separate that, but I think people need to remind themselves that, you don't have to have a stage or this great job or this great roll on a surface. We just don't understand the impact that we make from doing the things that we label as small that in reality are big. So some of my clients say, what's my purpose? I just have a kid. I have a job that I don't really like, stuff like that. And I would just say, look, having that kid, that is a big role. That's not something I could do just yet. I don't have any kids. I hats off to any parents who are doing that. That's a big role. But if people are lost in their joy and their love, I would just say find something that you enjoyed to do when you were a kid. I always love what Wayne Dyer said in the Shift documentary, where someone asked him, like, how does one find God? And he just said, God is found through enthusiasm. And they're like, "Oh, what do you mean by that?" And he just said enthusiasm comes from that Greek word entheos, which means the divine within. And so when you're finding your joy, and that's very much subjective. My joy is probably someone else's misery. Like the I'm a New York Jets fan. Like that would be misery for someone else, but for me, I am, I guess, masochistic. I don't know what it is, but that's a part of what we do on the other side is the things that we love in this earth are not very small. We'll continue those things, and I think for people, is to really find interests, find hobbies, find activities, because you'll continue to build off of those things when you do cross over, you know.
Limitless potential, so inspiring. Well, Jacob, I would imagine people watching are a bit like chomping at the bit. They want to figure out how can they connect with you, how can they work with you, where can they get your books, because you've written several and you have such a unique perspective, because not very many NDEers bring that experience into their almost entire lifetime. So how can people work with you?
Yeah, I'm not on that side. That was for a bit of time. I'm on this side, so I'm accessible. So you could find me on the World Wide Web at jacobelcooper.com, jacobelcooper.com. You could also find me on Instagram, and Facebook as well. And I do remote sessions, in-person sessions, and I have my two books here, Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, and those are all available usually on Amazon and some other indie sites, whatever. But that's I just love writing books, telling this story, because I love that quote by a gentleman named Elie Wiesel, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner, survived the Holocaust, and he said, God made us because God loves stories, and we're all just a collection of God's stories. And
Ah,
I think a book in the way is a way for yourself to define that story, and our lives are the stories that we give over to the universe, to God, and just make it interesting, make it inspiring, and we could all do that each and every day in each and every way. But yeah, jacobelcooper.com is where people could connect with me. So
well, I will put everything in the show notes so that people can find you. Jacob, this has been such an amazing conversation. I have enjoyed every second of it. And I'm going to say to
was
you, I think Pablo Picasso would be very proud of you, because you have been giving your gift away for the entire time we've been talking, and probably so much more before that and after. So thank you so much for what you are doing, for your part in waking up the collective consciousness, because it is so needed right now.
Thank you. And no, we're all the artists of our lives. We all have a canvas in front of us, and we're all just trying to draw the best picture of our lives that we live. But a great honor to, hear that he would be proud. Yeah.
He would, for sure, for sure. And I want to also thank everybody for watching. Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.